I believe that where you grow up shapes who you become, and for me, that journey started before I was born. In the late 1970s, my parents left Europe in search of better opportunities. They immigrated to the United States with dreams of building a new life. My mother was pregnant with me when they arrived in Cleveland. My father, a skilled jeweler, quickly found work, and together they began creating a future not just for themselves but for the family they were starting. As I grew up, I often heard about the sacrifices they made. My father's hard work and persistence eventually led to a comfortable life for us. By the time my younger brother, Nathan, was born, my father had opened his own jewelry store in the Lakeview district, a symbol of everything he had achieved. We lived well in a quiet neighborhood called Brookfield, but I never forgot that their journey hadn't been easy. My name is Zack Cole, though most people call me Zack. Thanks to my father's relentless efforts, we lived comfortably, and my parents now spend their winters in Arizona. I was a pretty average student, more focused on hockey and girls than academics. After finishing school, I struggled to find stable work due to my limited job prospects. Eventually, I got a job in customer service for a Portland-based building materials company. A year later, I transferred to Portland, where, surprisingly, my prior skills helped me land a better role. I quickly fell in love with Portland's vibrant energy, stunning riverside views, and scenic mountains. Through work in hockey, I made new friends. I joined a local beer league hockey team and ended up as a first-line defenseman, mainly because I was one of the few players who could skate backward. It was fun, kept me fit, and gave me a sense of belonging. At the end of the season, I met Lena at a team barbecue. Like me, she was originally from Cleveland. We clicked right away, exchanged numbers, and started dating. Lena was attractive, with short dark brown hair and a slim figure. Within a year, I proposed to her. After some serious talks about our future together, she accepted. We had been physically close for months before the engagement, and while Lena was a bit more traditional in some ways, we both seemed happy with where things were headed. Lena worked as a lab technician, handling medical tests for private clinics throughout the state. She was proud of her role and enjoyed her job, as well as the friendships she'd built with her mostly female coworkers. The only man in the lab was their boss, Robert Morrison. When Lena and I planned for our future, we calculated that if I secured a sales position, our combined income would reach around $90,000, potentially enough to buy a house, even in Portland's tough housing market. She accepted my proposal on the condition that I get the job. A few months later, I did. We set a wedding date and shared the exciting news with our families. My parents were overjoyed, while Lena's parents were more cautious. Still, they made plans to attend. We got married in a small community chapel and honeymooned briefly in San Diego and Los Angeles before settling into our rented apartment. I worked hard in my new sales role, consistently meeting my targets, while Lena continued working at the lab with her more stable hours. Despite our different schedules, life was good. We eventually saved up enough to buy a suburban townhouse. Soon after moving in, we celebrated our third wedding anniversary. Talks about starting a family came up, but Lena wanted to wait until we were in a more secure financial position, though she never said exactly when that would be. Like many couples, our intimacy shifted over time. Before marriage, we were physically close 4 or 5 times a week, but after 3 years, it dropped to once or twice a week. When I brought it up with Lena, she got defensive, saying work had been exhausting. While I missed the earlier rhythm, I adjusted, realizing that not all couples have the same needs at the same time. Overall, we seemed happy and on track for a successful life together. Something unexpected happened that year. I formed a close friendship with a woman named Alice Reynolds after she and her husband Harry moved in next door. Despite being best friends, there was no romantic or inappropriate element to our relationship. Alice was a stay-at-home mom with 2 young children, while Harry worked as a car salesman. Alice had a sharp sense of humor, a direct attitude, and a bold way of speaking her mind. She was a bit taller than Lena, with reddish blonde hair and blue eyes. She often joked that Harry did the honorable thing by marrying her after she got pregnant. Their kids, 10-year-old Abby and 7-year-old Ryan, were well-behaved and polite. Alice sometimes called Harry Eddie when she was annoyed, though most people just called him Harry. He was about 6 feet tall with curly red hair, a ruddy complexion, and an over-the-top sense of style, flashy suits, a fake Rolex, and a chunky gold ring. He seemed to think this was the perfect look for a car salesman. While others found Harry's upbeat personality endearing, I found him more irritating than charming. Lena, however, stayed neutral toward him. I got along much better with Alice. She had a refreshing honesty that I appreciated, and her kids were great too. Abby, often called Abby instead of her full name, was a sweet, polite girl who seemed destined to be a heartbreaker. Ryan was a playful and cheerful little guy with the best manners, which I admired. I sometimes wondered if Lena's distance from Alice and her kids was a signal that she wasn't ready to have children of her own. If we did have kids, I secretly hoped they'd be as well behaved as Abby and Ryan. Things took a difficult turn last spring. After 6 years of marriage and nearly saving enough to upgrade to a house, I was hit with unexpected news. I was laid off. My company had been sold, and our branch was closed. It was a crushing blow, and I was left reeling. Lena's reaction wasn't what I expected. Instead of offering support, she was furious, almost as if I'd failed her personally. Losing my job was a heavy blow to my confidence. I started job hunting right away, but opportunities in my field were scarce. Each morning, Lena would head to work with a quick kiss, while I stayed home searching for openings, growing more discouraged by the day. After 2 frustrating weeks, I was feeling down when Alice showed up one morning. "Hey, handsome, got any more coffee?" she asked with her usual playful tone. She'd been calling me handsome for years, even in front of Harry and Lena, and neither of them seemed to mind. I invited her in, and as we chatted, I told her about losing my job. True to her straightforward nature, Alice acknowledged how rough it was but didn't dwell on it. Unlike Lena, who had been distant, Alice actively tried to help. "So, what were you best at in school?" she asked. I thought for a moment and replied, "English, especially writing." Her eyes lit up. "Perfect. I've got a friend who works from home writing instruction manuals. She's swamped and turns down work all the time. You should talk to her." I felt a surge of hope. "That sounds amazing." "Thank you, Alice," I said, genuinely grateful for her support. Her friend's name was Nora Smith. Alice handed me her phone, and I caught Nora at just the right moment. I offered to call back, but she was on break and happy to chat. Since I was a friend of Alice's, she was friendly and open. Nora explained how she'd been unemployed and desperate for work when she stumbled on a job writing product manuals for an import-export company. The company needed clear instructions for products from overseas, especially since the original translations were hilariously bad. Nora said it turned into a steady gig. "They're also looking for someone who can do French translations," she added. "They've been paying for expensive services, but they want someone in-house who can write and translate. It's especially tough for the machinery manuals." She gave me the company's name and the contact information for the hiring manager. I asked if I could mention her as a reference, and she agreed. I handed the phone back to Alice and poured us both more coffee. "Alice, you and Nora might have just saved my life." "I can't thank you enough," I said, barely holding back my emotions. Alice grinned. "No need. It's just nice to see you perk up. You looked miserable earlier." "Yeah, well, Lena hasn't really grasped our situation yet. She's not happy about me being unemployed. It's wrecking all the plans we had." "Come on, Zack," she said, leaning forward. "You didn't get fired. This stuff happens to people all the time. Harry's been laid off before too." I give him a pep talk, maybe a little extra motivation, and he's back at it the next day. She laughed with a wink. "Sounds like a good strategy," I said, feeling a bit envious of how easily she seemed to handle things. Compared to Alice's calm outlook, Lena's frustration with me felt harsher. I wasted no time. I called the number Nora had given me and got through to Mr. Perez, the hiring manager. I mentioned Nora's name and offered to provide a free sample of my work to prove myself. He sounded interested and asked if I could meet him that afternoon. We scheduled a 2 p.m. appointment. I was so relieved that I hugged Alice, nearly in tears. "You have no idea how good this feels, Alice," I said. "Glad to help," she replied with a grin. Alice left around 11 a.m., and I immediately went into prep mode. I showered, shaved, and picked out a clean navy blazer, tan slacks, and a crisp white shirt. I didn't change into them until after lunch to avoid any spills. At 2 p.m., I met Mr. Perez at his office, a modest building attached to a large warehouse. He was a balding man in his mid-50s, wearing a rumpled suit. He seemed a bit rough around the edges, and I worried he might be looking for cheap labor. But since Nora had spoken highly of him, I kept an open mind. Mr. Perez explained that his company imported machinery from Asia, mostly from China and Thailand. Their products ranged from plastics equipment to woodworking machines. The biggest issue, he said, was the horrible quality of the translated instructions that came with the shipments. Even I can't understand them, he admitted, and I speak some Chinese. He needed clear, precise instructions written in English, and on top of that, French translations to sell to French-speaking clients. The cost of outsourcing translations had been high, and the quality was poor. If you can do both, he said, you'd be saving me a lot of money. Here's an idea, I suggested. Let me tackle a sample project for you. If it works out, we can negotiate a rate going forward. Sounds fair? Fair enough, he replied. I just hope you can handle it, because I really need someone reliable. And if you do well, I'll make sure it's worth your time. Sounds good to me. Why don't you give me something to work on? I can either do it here or take it home and bring it back when it's done. He smiled and said, my computer's a dinosaur. You'll get it done faster on your own machine. Take it home, and we'll review it when you're ready. Great. Show me the instructions, I said. He handed me a slim folder from a stack and led me into the warehouse, where rows of machinery sat crated up, waiting for delivery. This is the machine these instructions are for. Look it over and ask me if you have any questions. I flipped through the manual and compared the drawings to the actual machine. The parts seemed to match up. How accurate are these drawings? I asked. Most of the time, they're good, he replied, but once in a while, they send old drawings for new machines. It causes problems because customers get confused. I can't sell machines with bad instructions, it's bad for business. I get it, I said, nodding. These drawings seem accurate, so I'll start with these instructions. If I run into any issues, I'll call you. This is a trial run, I reminded him. If it works out and I'm good at it, we'll talk about rates. A smart approach, he said with a smile. I left feeling a rush of excitement. This was a chance to do something different, more interesting than my last job. If it worked out, I'd be doing meaningful work and maybe even working from home. It felt like a fresh start, and I hadn't felt that in a long time. When I got home, I told Lena about the opportunity. I thought she'd be happy for me, but she wasn't. What do you know about machinery, Zack? How are you going to make money doing this? I know someone who's already doing it, and she's doing it from home, which is exactly what I want to do. Oh, great. So you'll sit around all day while I'm working hard at the lab, she said, arms folded. Why would you think that? Working from home would save us money on commuting. It's a smart move. Show me you can actually make a living doing it, Zack, she shot back. If it were that easy, everyone would be doing it. Not everyone can do it, I countered. I have strong writing skills, a mechanical mind, and I'm bilingual. You know that's rare, especially around here. I think I have a real shot, but I need to try. How much is he paying you for this project? Nothing yet, I admitted. This is a trial to prove I can do the work. Once I know how long it takes, I'll set a price for future jobs. Great. You're working for free on a job you don't even know you can do. Fantastic, Lena said, stomping off to the kitchen. Her reaction deflated my enthusiasm, but I was determined to prove myself. After dinner, I went straight to our home office and got to work. The English version of the instructions was so badly translated it was almost unreadable. I took a deep breath and started rewriting it from scratch. By midnight, after battling a headache and a stiff neck, I had finished a page and a half of the 6-page manual. It was slow progress, but I was finding my rhythm. Exhausted, I went to bed, took a couple of Tylenol, and quickly fell asleep, feeling satisfied with my effort. When I woke up, Lena was already dressed and eating her usual yogurt and granola breakfast. Since she doesn't drink coffee, there was none made. I greeted her, and she mumbled a response before giving me a quick peck on the cheek and leaving for work at 7:10 a.m. I went back to our office, reviewed my work from the night before, fixed a few small errors, and continued where I left off. I was on my second or third cup of coffee when I heard Alice's familiar voice. You? It's me again, handsome, she called from the back door, her voice full of playful energy. Come on in, Alice. Grab a coffee. I'm in my office, I replied. She walked in, immediately taking in my appearance, unshaven, still in my t-shirt and boxers. Well, look at you, she said, smirking. Living that executive life, huh? Just because I haven't shaved or dressed doesn't mean I'm a slob, I shot back. Alice laughed as she poured herself a cup. What are you working on this time? Page 3 of 6, I replied with exaggerated seriousness. Translating instructions for the Heavenly Blossom Model 356K14 thickness planer. Alice burst out laughing. Where do they come up with these ridiculous names? I shrugged. No clue, but this is tougher than I expected. I spent 5 hours last night just getting through a page and a half. It's going faster now, though. I should finish by noon and start on the French version right after. And you're doing this for free? She asked, raising an eyebrow. Yeah. Lena wasn't impressed either, but it's the results that matter. I'll know soon enough if it's worth it. Good luck, Zack. I believe you're going to surprise Lena, Alice said, her tone supportive as ever. After a brief pause, Alice glanced at me with a more serious expression. Can I ask you something personal? Sure. Go ahead, I said. Do you think you and Lena are really happy? She asked, her eyes steady on me. I paused, staring into my coffee. That's a good question, Alice. A damn good one, I said, leaving it at that. By 11:30 a.m., I finished the English version and called Mr. Perez to let him know I'd have the French version done later that afternoon. He sounded pleased and told me to stop by any time. That boost in confidence helped me push through. After a quick lunch and some help from my dictionary, I finished the French version by 2:30 p.m. I double-checked both versions and found no errors. I changed into business clothes, navy blazer, tan slacks, and a white shirt, and drove to Mr. Perez's office. He reviewed my English version, nodding occasionally and making small notes. After a few minutes, he set the papers down and said, "Excellent, Mr. Cole. I'll send these out for verification. If your French checks out, we'll have a deal." He glanced up at me and asked, "How many hours did you spend on this?" "About 11, I replied. "All right," he said, leaning back. "I'll have a check for $660 ready for you tomorrow." I blinked, surprised. I thought this was supposed to be a free trial. "I don't take advantage of good work," he replied firmly. "I believe we can do good business together." He went on to suggest I incorporate my business to avoid tax issues and protect myself from liability. I thanked him sincerely, then asked if he'd inform me if there were any problems with the French version. As I was about to leave, he surprised me with a question. "Don't you want your next assignment?" "Of course," I stammered, eager to continue. He smiled, clearly confident in my abilities. "I'm sure your French version will be just as good as your English. Thanks to Miss Nora for introducing you." He handed me another manual, and we went to the back of the warehouse to check out the machine it was for. After confirming the drawings were up to date, we shook hands, and I left with a spring in my step. At $60 an hour, I realized that a 40-hour workweek would gross over $120,000 a year. Seeing the stack of work on Mr. Perez's desk made me feel optimistic. When I told Lena about the pay rate, it seemed to improve her mood. She even suggested we celebrate that night. I was feeling more confident about our future and eager to tell Alice, who had sparked this whole idea. The next morning, I started on the new manual. It was a simpler machine, so the process went faster. I finished the English version by 1 p.m. and the French version before dinner, 8 hours total. The following morning, I called Mr. Perez, who was pleased with my work and eager to send me the next project. I delivered it to him later that day. "Mr. Perez, can we set up a system where I don't have to drive in every day?" I asked. I could work on a week's worth of manuals at a time and email the finished translations. He agreed and suggested setting up direct deposit for payments. I appreciated that, but I knew I'd need to open a business account first. We discussed drafting a formal contract, and I told him I'd consult my business advisor. By the end of the week, I had a new career. I filed for a business license under the name Precise Word Services Incorporated, opened a business account, and printed business cards. On my lawyer's advice, I drafted a letter of understanding for Mr. Perez, outlining our agreement and hourly rate. I also bought a color laser printer as a business expense. By Thursday, I had completed and returned 5 manuals and picked up 6 more, reviewing the machines before leaving. I wondered how many machines Mr. Perez had in stock. By the end of the week, I'd booked 46 billable hours, earning nearly $4,000. With Friday's work, I was on track to double that amount. I worked nonstop in my home office. Lena barely saw me except during dinner, where we had brief conversations. At first, she seemed indifferent, but her curiosity grew as the paychecks rolled in. One night, she asked, "How often do you get paid?" "I get paid per job. I'm a contractor, so I handle my own taxes and expenses," I explained. She nodded, thinking. "Can you spare $1,000? Things have been tight since you lost your job." "Sure," I said cautiously. Even though my business was bringing in about $3,000 a week, I didn't want to overcommit. Still, I transferred $1,000 from my business account to our joint checking account. Lena seemed surprised but pleased. It felt good to contribute again, even though I hadn't been out of work long. Later, I met with Mr. Perez to gauge the future of our partnership. He reassured me that more complex machines were on the way, meaning plenty of work ahead. Relieved, I felt like I could finally breathe. On a warm day, Alice stopped by as usual. She greeted me with a grin. "Hey, handsome. Where have you been hiding?" I beckoned her over. "Come on in, and I'll tell you." As Alice sat at the kitchen table, I couldn't help but share the news with a hint of pride. "You're now talking to the president of Precise Word Services Incorporated, Zack Cole." She laughed, shaking her head. "Yeah, right. The president, huh?" "Sure, Zack." We shared a light-hearted moment before she added, "It's good to see you happy." "It's been a while." "Yeah," I admitted, "it feels like a weight's been lifted. I can finally move forward again." Curious, she asked, "How does Lena feel about all this?" I met her gaze. "She doesn't really know." Alice raised an eyebrow. "You mean she can't decide how she feels?" "No," I clarified. "I haven't told her how well the business is doing." Her face hardened. "Why not?" "I don't know," I said, uneasy. "I just have this feeling something's off." "That's easy," Alice said, her tone matter-of-fact. "You don't trust her." "You think so?" I asked, seeking reassurance. Alice nodded, her expression firm. "I know so. I can tell something's off between you two, and I'm pretty sure it's not you." Curious, I pressed her. "Why do you say that?" "Because I know you, Zack," she said bluntly. "You're straightforward, no nonsense. I've seen how Lena treats you when she thinks no one is watching. She acts like she married beneath her. I don't know why, but that's how it looks to me." Her words hit harder than I expected. "Her parents," I muttered. "What about them?" Alice asked. "They don't think much of me," I explained. "Maybe it's rubbing off on her." Alice scoffed, crossing her arms. "Are her parents royalty or something?" "No," I replied, shaking my head. "Her dad's a city employee, and her mom works part-time at a grocery store. Definitely not royalty." "Then they should be grateful she married someone who treats her well," Alice snapped. "You deserve better than that." I sighed, leaning back. Maybe they had higher expectations for her. "Well, that's their problem, not yours," Alice said, her voice sharp. "So, what now?" I hesitated before answering. "I don't know. I still love her, but it feels like she's given up on me. I hope I'm wrong." Alice glanced at me, her tone softer this time. "I hope so too, Zack." There were no clear signs that Lena was cheating on me, but her coldness left me uneasy. A few weeks later, she mentioned working overtime due to a reorganization at the lab. We seemed to be drifting apart, and it weighed on me. I was nearing 28, and we still hadn't started a family. I wondered if we ever would. I cut back on working late at night, hoping to spend more time with Lena and rekindle our connection. I also started depositing $800 to $1,000 a week into our joint account, explaining that the business was doing well and had stabilized. Despite the extra money, our relationship stayed distant. Our physical intimacy dwindled to once or twice a week. No matter how much effort I put in, nothing changed. Meanwhile, my business with Mr. Perez was thriving. He regularly praised my work, and as I became more efficient, I had extra time for myself. Occasionally, I'd treat myself to a lunch out or a beer at the local bar. After our intense conversation a few weeks earlier, Alice and I hadn't seen much of each other until I started inviting her over for morning coffee. It became our daily routine, a quiet time where we could talk openly without worrying about being overheard. One morning, as we sat at the kitchen table, Alice asked, "How's Lena?" Same. Distant, I replied, stirring my coffee. You think you two will make it? She asked, tilting her head slightly. I want to keep trying, but I'm not sure, I admitted. Both of you have to try for it to work, Alice pointed out. Yeah, I know, I muttered. Then she paused, her eyes narrowing. Zack, she's cheating on you. I froze. Alice would never joke about something like that. You know this for sure? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Yeah, she said firmly. With who? My voice shook. Her boss, Alice said flatly. Robert Morrison. How long? I asked, feeling the cold spread through my chest. Not long with him, she admitted. But, he's not the first. I blinked, stunned. What? Who else? Alice's face hardened. Al. I sat back, disbelief washing over me. Al? Are you serious? Yeah, she nodded. It happened a few months ago. Holy crap. Anyone else? I asked, bracing myself. I don't know, she admitted. But one's enough, isn't it? Yeah, I muttered. More than enough. Alice clenched her jaw. I'm done with Al. I'm kicking him out. He's done this before, and if I let it slide, he'll do it again. I'm looking for a job before I leave him, though. I'm not going to let my kids live in poverty. Jesus, Alice, I muttered, rubbing my temples. Can this get any worse? I remember you asking me that same question when you lost your job, Alice said with a bitter laugh. What a mess, I muttered, feeling frustration well up inside me. Yeah, she agreed. I sighed, mind racing. Well, I guess I'll be rethinking my financial plans. No way am I giving Lena anything after this. She can go live with her boss. Can't blame you, Alice said. Just don't do anything that'll land you in jail. I need you for my morning coffee. I tried to laugh. Maybe we should both kick them out and move in together. Alice raised an eyebrow. You're forgetting something, Zack. The kids. No, I'm not, I replied, half smiling. If they don't come with us, the deal's off. She laughed, but I noticed tears welling up in her eyes. We both needed the release. It felt good to have someone to talk to, someone who understood. We agreed to set aside our spouse problems for the day. I had work to finish, and I needed to figure out how to cope with living under the same roof as Lena while deciding what to do next. Strangely, I felt emotionally detached. I wasn't angry, just disappointed. I even wondered how many others there had been besides Al and her boss. That evening, I acted as if nothing had changed, though it took me longer than usual to fall asleep. My mind kept circling the same thought, I needed proof. Not that I doubted Alice, but I wanted to see it for myself. The next morning, Lena claimed she had to work late again. I suspected it was just an excuse to see her boss. I called Alice, borrowed her car, and staked out the clinic parking lot. At 6:45 p.m., I saw Lena walk out of the clinic with a tall man in a sharp suit. I didn't need to guess who it was, Robert Morrison. They got into a black Mercedes and drove off. I followed them at a safe distance until they pulled into a hotel parking lot. My heart pounded in my chest, my grip on the steering wheel tightening. They each grabbed a small overnight bag from the car and walked inside together. I snapped several photos from a distance. The sight of them walking into that hotel together felt like a punch to the gut. But now, I had the proof I needed. After returning Alice's car, I told her everything. She hugged me tightly and advised me to stay calm before confronting Lena. Cool down, Zack. Think before you do anything. You don't want to act out of rage. The next morning, over coffee, Alice and I discussed our next steps. Her kids were at school, and it gave us some quiet time to figure things out. I told her I was angry and hurt, but more than anything, I knew my marriage was over. There was no doubt about it now. How did you even find out? I asked her, still puzzled by how she knew before I did. People talk, she said, folding her arms. Word gets around. Someone at the lab noticed the affair with her boss. It eventually got to one of my friends, and since everyone knows we're neighbors, they told me. How do you even know for sure? I asked, needing confirmation. People talk, Alice said confidently. A lot of people know about Lena's affair. How'd you find out about Lena and Harry? I asked, still stunned. Nosy neighbor, Alice replied, shaking her head. She noticed Harry coming to your place when you weren't home. I guess Lena bought into his whole big-shot salesman routine. Alice leaned forward, her eyes sharp. Is Robert Morrison married? Yeah, I confirmed. But that's all I know about him. Without a word, Alice grabbed the phone book, found his home number, and dialed. Hello, is this Mrs. Natalie Morrison? She asked, her tone sweet but firm. There was a brief pause before she said, Oh, I'm sorry, I must have the wrong number, and hung up. Turning to me with a grin, she said, Yup, he's married. No kids, though. I shook my head, more impressed than surprised. No wonder I could never fool you. Of course not, she said with a smirk. We sat in silence for a moment before Alice spoke again. We should check the property records for that clinic. I raised an eyebrow. Why? You might find some leverage, she said, tapping the table. Sometimes, a title search reveals things people don't expect. Want to go check it out? I've got all the time in the world, I said, grabbing my keys. 10 minutes and $10 later, we had our answer. The property title for the clinic was in the name of Mrs. Natalie Morrison, not Robert. The home address on file was the same as the one Alice had called. Alice grinned like a cat who'd just cornered a mouse. Looks like Natalie Morrison owns the clinic. And the lover boy might just be the manager, not the boss. I chuckled, shaking my head. I doubt Lena knows that. If she thinks he's some big shot, she's in for a rude awakening when I end things with her. Ain't that a shame, Alice said with mock sympathy. We left City Hall and grabbed lunch together. Being with Alice always lifted my mood. We avoided talking about our relationships until we were back at my townhouse. So, what's next? I wondered aloud. Did you take the pictures I told you to? Alice asked. Yeah, I said, connecting my camera to my computer. We scrolled through the photos together. The images spoke for themselves, Lena and Robert together at the hotel desk, heading to the elevator, each with an overnight bag in hand. These are solid, Alice said, nodding in approval. You could hire a private detective for more evidence, but honestly, it's not worth it. Whether you divorce her for infidelity or irreconcilable differences, it's all the same. Save your money and brace for the storm. I never thought it would come to this, I muttered, staring at the screen. No one ever does, Alice replied. I didn't think Harry would cheat on me either, but he did. More than once. I'm just stuck for now, trying to get a job before I can leave him. I won't put my kids through poverty. I glanced at her, an idea forming in my mind. I've been thinking about something, I started cautiously. Hear me out with an open mind. I'll try, she replied, giving me her full attention. Remember the other day when I joked about us moving in together with the kids? I asked. Well, the more I think about it, the more I like the idea. My business is doing well, my income this year will clear $125,000. I could buy a 4-bedroom house in the same school district. You and the kids could move in as tenants until you find a job you like. No strings attached. Alice raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. That's a sweet offer, Zack, but it wouldn't be fair to you. What about your personal life and future? You don't want to stay single forever, do you? Of course not. But this doesn't have to be permanent. If you find a job and want to move out, you can. At least you'd have a stable home for the kids in the meantime, I said, trying to sound logical. Alice hesitated. You're a great guy, Zack, but what happens when I leave? You'll be stuck in a big house by yourself. I shrugged, smiling faintly. Maybe you won't want to leave. Her eyes widened, realization dawning on her. Are you saying you have feelings for me? I nodded. Sorry, but yeah. Oh, Zack, she groaned, clearly conflicted. Don't do this to me. Do what? I asked, tilting my head. Don't mess with my head, she said, her voice tense. This is too much. I haven't even kicked Harry out yet, and now you're telling me this? I know, I admitted. But what they did to us wasn't fair either. This isn't about fairness, Alice. It's about what we both know. If you don't feel the same, just say so. Alice didn't answer right away. She stood up and wandered around the kitchen, then the living room, shaking her head and mumbling to herself. I took it as a good sign, she hadn't said no, and she hadn't stormed off. Finally, she turned around and walked toward me. "Damn you, Zack," she muttered, her eyes wet with tears. "How could you?" Without warning, she wrapped her arms around me in a tight embrace. When she finally let go, I stood up and hugged her back. "Can I take that as a yes?" I asked. "Of course. How could I say no to you?" she replied, wiping her eyes but smiling. "No strings, Alice," I said softly. "If it works, great. If not, no pressure." She gazed into my eyes. "Then I'll make sure it works." She hugged me again, her tears returning. The next week, I hired a family law firm and retained Polly Kinsey, a sharp lawyer with a reputation for protecting her clients' interests. Polly advised me to be transparent about my income if necessary but suggested I offer Lena a simple deal, split the current assets, no alimony, and hope she agrees before she finds out how much I'm making. I agreed and told Polly to prepare the papers. The following week was uneventful, but Lena claimed she had to work overtime twice. Polly called to confirm the divorce papers were ready, so I called Alice. "It's D-Day," I told her. "I have the papers. Just need to figure out how to deliver them." "I'll be right there." "Get the coffee ready," she replied. When Alice arrived, we chatted over coffee. I laid out my plan. "Tonight, I'll confront Lena. I'll tell her I know about her affair with Robert Morrison and give her the divorce papers. If she resists, I'll show her the photos and mention that her coworkers know too. And if she really pushes it, I'll remind her that Natalie Morrison owns the clinic." "Smart," Alice said, nodding. "Have you packed a bag?" "Not yet, but I will before she gets home." "No overtime tonight," I said with a smirk. Alice kissed me lightly and hugged me. "Good luck. Call me after it's done." That evening, after dinner, I told Lena we needed to talk. She stiffened, clearly expecting a conversation about our lack of connection. "Enough talk, Lena. I know about your affair with Robert Morrison," I said, my voice calm. "Since you clearly don't respect me or our marriage, I'm divorcing you. Here are the papers." Her face went pale. She gasped, coughing, struggling to breathe. "How?" was all she could say. "You weren't discreet," I replied. "Your coworkers knew. Half the clinic knows." Her eyes filled with tears. "Oh God, I'm sorry, Zack. I wish I could explain. I'm so sorry. I'm offering you a 50-50 split," I said. "We can sell the townhouse and split the equity, or you can buy me out. Either way, I'm not living here anymore." "That's fair," she said quietly, unable to meet my eyes. I stared at her, searching for an answer. "Why didn't you just say something?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "I thought Robert would give me a better life. He's successful, and I thought he could offer more than you." I smirked. "You mean like a promotion?" "Maybe," she admitted, looking away. "But I was wrong." "Yeah, you were," I said, picking up my bag. "Good luck with your upgrade." At my meeting with Mr. Perez, he surprised me with a massive proposal. He wanted me to manage the translation of manuals for tractors, backhoes, and forklifts imported from China. The scope of the project was far beyond anything I'd done before. "I'm not sure I can handle this alone," I admitted. "This is a big project, and I'm no expert on this type of equipment." "Mr. Cole, you are very good at what you do," he said, his tone encouraging. "Can you find people to help? I'll pay $100 an hour. This is a big job, and I trust you to do it right." I could see he was relying on me, and it was hard to turn down an opportunity like that. "Let me review one of the manuals and see if I can make it work," I said, still feeling the weight of the challenge. "Thank you, Mr. Cole." "I trust you," he said, clearly relieved. I left his office with a forklift manual in hand, feeling a mix of excitement and nerves. This was a big leap, and I didn't want to mess it up. On the drive home, my thoughts shifted to Alice. I felt a sudden chill and pulled out my phone, thinking of calling her. But what if Harry was still there? If something had gone wrong, I didn't want to make things worse. I decided to wait and check in when I reached her place. When I arrived at Alice's townhouse around 10:30, I saw that Harry's car was gone. I called her, and she answered in a quiet, tired voice. "Hello," she said. "Alice, it's Zack. Are you okay?" I asked, my concern growing. "Yeah, I'm okay," she replied, her voice still soft. "Can I come in?" "I'm right outside," I said. Just making sure Harry's gone, she said. He is, I assured her. All right, come in. Coffee's ready, she said. When I walked in, I found Alice sitting at the kitchen table, her eyes red and puffy. She looked exhausted. I sat next to her, poured a cup of coffee, and leaned in. What happened? I asked gently. She sighed, rubbing her eyes. He broke down, Zack. Full on crying, begging me for another chance, on his knees, no less. She shook her head, trying to process it. It was so pathetic, I started crying too. Did he agree to leave? I asked, leaning forward. Yeah, but not without a fight, she replied. He tried to deny everything at first. But then I mentioned Lena and why you're divorcing her, and he looked like he was going to be sick. When I brought up Anna Jackson and what that girl at school told Abby, he finally lost it. That sounds rough, I said. How are you holding up? Not great, Zack. Like you, I feel like I wasted years, 10 years I can't get back, she admitted, her voice trembling. Part of me is angry, part of me is sad. There's a big difference between your 10 years and my 7, I said, locking eyes with her. Oh yeah? What's that? She asked, a bit puzzled. Abby and Ryan, I replied, taking her hands and giving them a gentle squeeze. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she finally let herself break down. I held her close, letting her release the pain she'd been carrying. Alice was strong, and I knew she'd come out of this okay, but I also knew it would hurt for a while. Tell me everything, I urged softly. She wiped her eyes and took a deep breath before recounting it all. She had Harry sit at the kitchen table while she told him she was filing for divorce. He tried to talk his way out of it, but Alice wasn't having it. When he saw that she wasn't backing down, he switched to the sympathy act, bringing up the kids and their years together. But Alice was ready for it. I'd forgiven him too many times before, she said, eyes sharp with resolve. This time, I laid it all out, the stuff I knew, the things I let slide, all of it. When he realized it was over, he fell apart. Did he think it was temporary? I asked. At first, yeah, she replied. Until I handed him the divorce papers. Then it hit him that I was serious. He packed a suitcase, dragging it out the door like a dog with its tail between its legs. I wish I could have been there for you, I said sincerely. No, Zack, she said, shaking her head. I had to do it myself. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. She leaned back, her eyes weary but strong. Don't blame yourself because I'm upset. It had to be done, and it had to be done firmly. Well, I guess we're both starting fresh now, I said, giving her a small smile. I'm just glad you'll be part of my life. Her eyes searched mine. Are you having second thoughts about us? Of course not, I said firmly. But it's your choice, Alice. Whatever happens, it's up to you. That's a cop-out, she shot back, sitting up straight. You tell me you have feelings for me, and then you leave it all up to me? What kind of man does that? I laughed, unable to help myself. Alice tried to stay serious, but a smile crept onto her face. Then, she wrapped her arms around my neck and kissed me deeply. I don't think we'll be apart anytime soon, she said, eyes twinkling. As expected, the offer I made on the house was countered, but it wasn't far from my ideal price. After a short negotiation, the deal was done. I now own a 4-bedroom house in a great neighborhood. I'm almost embarrassed by how easily I moved on from Lena. Looking back, I realized I never truly loved her, not the way my parents loved each other. I've learned what real love feels like, and it's nothing like what I had with Lena. Since signing the divorce papers, I haven't seen Lena. The final decree will be issued in February. Rumor has it she and Robert left with little more than his Mercedes. His soon-to-be ex-wife took over running the clinic, and from what I hear, Lena's plans for a better life didn't work out so well. As for Harry, he's still at the Chevy dealership, but he's a different man now. His divorce from Alice will be final in March. He visits the kids weekly, but his presence is quieter, and the single life clearly doesn't suit him as much as he thought it would. At my suggestion, Alice decided not to request alimony or child support. Harry was already struggling with mortgage payments and credit card debt. We didn't see any point in making things worse for him. We were financially secure, while he was barely keeping his head above water. Our story, on the other hand, was completely different. Alice doesn't take crap from anyone, not even me. I'll never understand how Harry could have cheated on her. I love Alice with everything I have, and I'd fight to keep her. The fourth bedroom in the new house didn't stay a bedroom for long. After Alice explained everything to Abby and Ryan, they both took it well, especially Abby, who was more aware of her dad's mistakes. Ryan was quiet for a few days but eventually adjusted. Kids are resilient like that. Alice told them about the new house, the big backyard, and the fact that they'd stay in the same school. That news eased their concerns. When she mentioned I'd be living with them, Ryan cheered, and Abby nodded with approval. We moved in after Halloween. I took the kids trick-or-treating in their old neighborhood, and they had a blast seeing familiar faces. No sign of Harry, probably something he couldn't handle. With Christmas approaching, I'm excited to spoil Alice and the kids, but carefully, since Alice doesn't like overindulgence. Our new life is everything I could have hoped for. As for work, I found a multilingual engineer to help with Mr. Perez's big project, and we secured a contract to produce manuals in English, French, and Spanish. I've got years of work ahead, not just for him but for other clients discovering my services. To top it all off, Alice and I are getting married during spring break in Hawaii. Our families will be there, and Alice's mom, who never liked Harry, has already called to say she can't wait.